go ahead and start. Just want to, I know we have like a small but mighty group, but really am hoping to make like a really effective use of this 1 hour. I know I really tried to like narrow it down and really be focused on this conversation so that, and I'm hoping that you all come with ideas of other things that needed to be added to this. So I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen. But want to just do a quick like overview walkthrough of really like what does this even mean? I know in kind of talking with some of you, there's been like, I kind of color coded it, I guess is the best way. This like pinky, purpley color really is the 6 system performance measures with one combination with the job and income growth. We actually have 7 measures, and then we combine that for both non-employment income and employment income. And then we added this like second lighter layer that is really describing like, what does that system performance measure mean? So what programs get pulled into that? And then like what is it? So for example, reduced returns within 1 year, it's the average amount of days. So, oh, those must have gotten flipped. So I will fix that. Those two. So want to, those really got flipped. Anyway, I will fix that. But the bigger thing is want to talk through the other things that are on here. Green is really the things that the COC is going to be responsible for. And then blue, this teal color is what both the COC and the regional action plan is doing. And then the blue is really what is the regional action plan doing. Also want to call attention to this like orange column over here of being like communication plan. And that is really, we have a communications work group that is coming together. They are meeting next week. It is a combination of board members, committee members, and like public who are expressing interest. I want to draw specifically attention to that communication work group is really about COC communication. Eric and I, who's kind of really, Eric Cole is kind of like really moving full steam ahead with that from a board perspective, but he and I met and made a list of all the things that we want covered. And that is, I would say, like separate from public education on a more broad stroke of like fighting NIMBYism and everything that is happening with the public education campaign and Home Matters. It will definitely have like overlap, and we have folks there from both spaces, but want to say that that is really talking about like, how do we get the system flow synthesis out and being spoken about on a broader basis? What are we doing to communicate what the COC does and doesn't do? How are we sharing like what housing is available in our community? So this isn't necessarily like a broad stroke, how do we bring more affordable housing, but we'll kind of interact with that more broad stroke, if that makes sense. And then lastly, I know we really want to be like rooted in data. So brought in this kind of like 8th category that is really just all of the things that you all are doing around data. I know we're doing like an HMIS evaluation specifically, but you all brought up some other things that you really wanted to do around data specifically. So want to spend the majority of today, kind of now that I've given you that overview, talking about these green boxes. And then are there other spaces where these green boxes need to be, or other things that you all are doing that need to be in a green box, right? So really you said all of the actions that we're doing should fall into one of these different groups. Like it either needs to be data, communication, or one of the 6 system performance measures. So is there other actions that you all are taking that fall into those that are not on here yet? Or are there other things that you're like, I know we need to be doing this and it's not on here, but like it should be. And then we can figure out where does it go.
Katie, great job of pulling this together.
I think this is good. I feel like we're there. And then now it's a matter of probably approving and then determining action steps.
So I would say, I think in looking at this and really in your first few strategy sessions, I think there were certain things that you all like kind of like spent more time stepping into, and that was where the regional action plan was. I would say looking at this, there's probably other things that need to be in green boxes that you all just haven't talked about, right? So what are you all doing to reduce returns within 1 year? I know the committee really wants to dive in and look at by rapid rehousing program type and permanent supportive housing type, where are returns happening and like what can we do? And is it one program or is it across our entire system? These are happening, and like why are they happening, right? So I think some of this work is already being done, but that's not being captured on this. And then there's also things that like haven't even been brought up that need to be done and probably need to be assigned to either you all or one of your committees that need to be done. Sorry, my lights just flashed and my lights aren't even on. So I was like, what's happening? So I would say like kind of a both and. Are there other things that like we need to capture and then either assign or keep yourselves and have that be one of y'all's focuses that we're continuing to check in on over time? Or is there, and some of these are like kind of assigned. So like giving direction to the coordinated entry subcommittee is an assignment of yours, but you are giving it to coordinated entry or you're giving it to data subcommittee. So I think we talked about this communication going both ways of like, this is what they're working on, but you also want to give more direction and that needs to be determined.
I have a question real quick. The system performance measure, reduced length of time homeless. The way that that's tracked is the total clients entering homeless project without a prior homeless entry in the last 24 months.
Sorry, I flipped 3 of them. And so I was just getting ready to display my other screen where they're not flipped.
Oh, got it. I'm like, wait a minute, what we're doing to try to achieve that is.
So this first one is actually here. It's the system average amount of days, and it includes emergency shelter, transitional housing, and safe haven.
And that's how the reduced length of time of homelessness system performance measure is tracked?
Yes.
And so those just need to be flipped?
Yeah. This one goes here. This entering a homeless project without a prior entry is first time homeless, and first time homeless is here. I don't know how this 3 got flipped.
Okay.
But I will.
Got it. Because yeah, I think those are what's going to be super helpful in us determining, okay, well, how is that even collected? You know, what are the project points that are putting in that information? And so we have a little bit more sight into it.
So I don't know if this fits, but on a communication strategy to the continuum, but also to providers, I would love it if the coordinated entry systems would generate some kind of periodic report on what they're seeing, how many people are on their wait lists, something that would just communicate the bigger picture of what's going on there. And maybe I'm just not on the distribution list. So if any of you all are getting that, please let me know and I'll figure out how to tap into it.
I think that, so I'm on the coordinated entry subcommittee and we're working on reviewing, well, what data points do we want to receive from the leads? And then like, how will we use those data points? So I've got a meeting here after this. The work's absolutely in progress, but for the purpose of this, to like memorialize that, right? How are board members going to continue to receive that information moving forward? It's like, where would we want to put that? Is, you know, and then we can say, hey, yeah, from the coordinated entry subcommittee, one of
I'm
our.
wondering if
Go ahead.
that's part of the communication strategy, what pieces of data or reports the board needs on what frequency? Or maybe it's part of data, the data strategy, I'm not sure.
I agree that it is in communication because they already, like Matt, Kelly, and Jusani already come to the board and they give us information, but we're going to say, hey, thank you. Here's specifically what we need. So I think it is in communication.
I would agree with that, Liz.
Is it their COC give direction to coordinate entry subcommittee? And then how do we make sure that that direction is data points? And what data points do we want? Like, I'm very confident with the work that's being done, the data points that we're working on as a subcommittee to say, hey, here's what this subcommittee needs. I'm confident that you all will like those as well. Maybe we have Matt and Jusani do a presentation on it or something just to make sure.
I think that's a great idea, Liz. How about recommendations from those of you who are so close to it? I wouldn't honestly even know what to ask for, what would be important to me until maybe I could react to something and go, oh yeah, that's really important. That's really helpful. But to try and tell you, I'm not close enough to it to know. I would love to see some recommendations.
Okay. Yeah. And it was funny because it was in the roles and responsibilities of the coordinated entry subcommittee to determine what data points needed to be collected. And it just hadn't been done at the time, but that's definitely in progress right now. A ton of work's being done on it. So
awesome to hear.
And we used to receive dashboards. Well, it's probably before I was on the board, but dashboards from both coordinated entry systems on a monthly basis with what was going on.
And maybe monthly is too frequent, but I will tell you that we use that data a lot, even in proposals, to paint a picture of what's happening in, at least from our side, the families side of the house. How many families are just waiting for entry into emergency shelter and the length of time it takes to get into emergency and then transition out to, the next step housing.
It's so funny you say that, Jackie, because from a government perspective, I'm constantly getting that question. It's just a simple question is, how long is the wait list right now? And so I use whatever number I heard last, but honestly, the level of accuracy I'm providing, I don't know, it's whatever I heard last. So I think that would be super helpful.
So
Yeah.
There is the Maricopa County System Flow Dashboard. That's where we can see the total number of active clients on the by name list, and we can filter it by family or single. But the coordinated entry subcommittee group is going like deeper into that to say, okay, out of those clients, these ones have not yet been assessed. They haven't had a VI SPDAT done. And then we have Solari doing charts where it's like, okay, here's the clients who have been on the by name list the longest, who haven't had a VI SPDAT, and what projects are they currently in? So we can narrow, hey, they're in shelter. And then we're like, great, shelters, you guys need to go get your VI SPDATs done, So I think that like, when you look at like total active, that's always going to be there in that Maricopa County System Flow Dashboard. And we can make sure in the coordinated entry subcommittee that we bring that to the board. And then in addition, these other data points that we've determined are relevant.
The question though is from just normal people who this is not their business, right? Is how long does it take somebody to get into family shelter? How long does it take someone so it's that length of time piece?
Okay.
And I think the communication, Liz, needs to be broader than just to the board. I think it's a communication that needs to go out like system-wide to providers within the system so that they have that data as well, because we're all out there trying to educate.
I would say, from a perspective of a lot of the updates that you all are receiving at the board get turned around and sent out with a newsletter. So that's a combination of any additional updates that come from those committees and also what they're giving to you at the board. So if you all are if you are on the COC newsletter, which goes out to 1,600 people, I would hope that you are getting that information.
Good point.
I don't know if a newsletter though is like the place that people would think, oh, that's where I can stay up to date on how long it takes and, you know, things like that. I feel like that should be a more of a technical piece of information that people have readily accessible. Newsletter to me says like interesting information, happenings, things you should be aware of, what people are working on. But I wouldn't potentially probably think of it to look for data, I guess. And it's just, you know, it's in an email and did I catch that email? And just like, could we like find the right home for the data maybe? If the rest of you guys think a newsletter is appropriate and we should all get used to looking for it there, that's totally fine too. That's just my thought.
It seems to me like a newsletter is more like, by the way, Katie, I think the newsletter is great. And I think it's been a very nice tool that you're working on. I love getting that. But a newsletter to me seems more like summary information versus the detailed report that I have in mind that we used to get, as Charles referenced, from the hub. I don't deal with the Welcome Center, so I wasn't sure what was coming out of there. But it's been a long time since we've seen any data coming out of coordinated entry. So just, you know, I don't know. It almost needs to be.
Hi, this is Letitia from UMOM. Sorry, I'm having camera issues today. But I heard Jackie mention the hub, and we do have a dashboard internally that we use here at UMOM that gives us real-time data for the hub, and we do share that with entry points. If that is something you all would like us to report on, we absolutely could do that in the COC committee meeting, and then that would feed up into the board. Also, I'm a strong proponent of cascading communication. If any data that we see relevant that needs to be fed through the subcommittees, I think having an agenda item that strictly, you know, supports the communication of data and evaluation on each subcommittee agenda, so everybody knows what's going on collectively, that would offer support to communication. So it's not just a newsletter, subcommittees are talking about it, then from the subcommittee, agencies are aware from their representatives. I'm just tossing that out there as an idea because I know we've discussed before that subcommittees are looking for guidance from the board, and this could be something we could offer to them, you know, propose standing agenda items.
I love that idea, Tish. And boy, I'd love to see that dashboard because we used to get them on a regular basis and it just hasn't been coming out for some reason. But thank you for that.
So being the newbie, this is the first I heard that you used to get it.
Yeah, I did.
Liz, you all have a standing agenda on coordinated entry that reports out where you're at with both families and singles on a regular basis. Is that?
I don't know if coordinated entry, if the subcommittee has that.
Anna goes over it. Anna or Randy sometimes they'll go over it in the coordinated entry subcommittee. Yeah. But okay. You're right though. It's not then communicated out of there that I'm aware of.
No,
right. It's just included in the notes, but like it is a like standing item, at least in coordinated entry, so that report out could get pulled to other committees.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's critical that we know what the inflow and the outflow looks like throughout all the subcommittees.
Yeah, I like your idea too. It's like if it's a standing, that's how we made it happen in coordinated entry subcommittee, was we made it a standing agenda item. And so the single side and the family side, they know when they hit that meeting, the first thing we're going to do is go over their dashboard. I do wonder for like the purpose of kind of like reviewing this in a little bit more detail. Katie, I wondered too, like, were we going to put it somewhere on here, like where we're currently at with that system performance measure?
We can, if you would like. My initial thought was to point back to the system flow synthesis, because we do on a quarterly basis create that system flow synthesis that refers back to where we were last year. So like currently it's the 2020 system performance measure, the 2021 system performance measure, and then last quarter what has happened. So we can add it here. That means that this is going to be like updated at least on a quarterly basis of what is happening versus on a yearly basis of what we submit to HUD. Do you all have a preference, or just kind of referencing them side by side?
I think obviously though, like whoever's doing the work, I would like to see it on here. And the reason why is because, so reduced length of time homeless is now a goal of ours, right? And the way that that's tracked is by the average amount of days someone spends time in an emergency shelter, transitional housing, or safe haven. We should be looking at what those results are to make sure that our action items below are impacting that and like affecting change in a positive way.
Hi, everyone. I think quarterly would be more helpful. If you wait for an annual report, it's kind of too late to make any adjustments or check in what programs that could be having that reduction, and just seeing what they're doing, and maybe everybody else needs to adjust to that. So I would vote for a quarterly update.
And then as far as this goes, so like, the action items, right? Our goal is 98 days. So is it possible for us to ask the ESG subcommittee to look at shelter long-term stayers? You know what I mean? And report out to us like their findings?
Yeah, you could ask your ESG subcommittee to do that. You could ask the committee to do that. There's a lot of different places you could put that. You could ask data subcommittee to look at that. Like, you just have to decide who are you asking to do that, or is it all of them, right? Like, is it who is the person? Like, who are you assigning that to, right? And like that could be an action for reducing long-term stay.
And I know we didn't want to go like provider specific, but in like above in this monitoring and assessment of COC funded agencies, like MAG would have provider level data. So is there any way like, to try to streamline and make it a little bit more efficient, where maybe there's a particular provider who is impacting this system performance measure in a greater way than everyone else? How can that get communicated to the right subcommittee to try to go and do something about it?
So I will say that COC funded agencies are only going to affect half your system performance measures. So like we don't, the COC cannot fund any emergency shelter, transitional housing, or safe haven. So there is kind of that, we can help you do it, right? But like ultimately at the end of the day, we have only carrots of like, hey, help us get there to improve our system performance measures. We don't have a stick of like, hey, you have somebody who's been staying in your shelter for 300 days. And so, but we can help identify that, right?
Well, and that's why I brought up the ESG subcommittee, because there are some that are like faith-based stuff, but most shelters receive some version of ESG funds for funding shelter. And I thought that's why HUD had done this, like you must have an ESG committee, is so that you would have that pairing between HUD funded programs and ESG funded programs, and an ability to like force communication to try to solve issues with system performance measures. So it seems like it might be a good place for us to at least take to ESG subcommittee to see if they can look at the shelters that they're funding and look at long-term stayers and develop a plan for trying to address it.
How do others feel about that addition?
I'm sorry, I was tuned out for a minute responding to something. Can you say that one more time, Liz?
Yeah, no problem. wanting to kind of, for an action item to reduce the length of time homeless in our system. The places that data is collected are emergency shelter, transitional housing, and safe havens. So I'm proposing that we ask our ESG subcommittee to review long-term stayers in emergency shelter and develop a plan for how they'll address long-term stayers. And I think that we should ask them to look at anyone staying over 90 days, since the goal is 98 days. So they should be looking at anyone who's over 98 days and developing a plan for them.
Okay, I think that's awesome. I think we're going to see a lot more longer stays right now, right? Because of the market. And I think that will lead to other discussions. But also every emergency shelter probably doesn't get ESG. Like Chandler doesn't receive ESG. There's other cities that don't too. We don't meet the funding criteria for it as a city. So so some shelters like potentially in the East Valley may be operating off of other kinds of funds. So could we look at our list of ESG funded recipients and then see what other shelters and transitional programs are missing? Because we really don't care the fund source, right? We're just trying to capture the data.
Whoever may have like a leverage, right? Like if you're ESG and you're funding it, then you have a little bit of leverage to be investigating that.
Yeah, and there'll be leverage from everybody, but like I might give CDBG to an emergency shelter because I don't have ESG. So there'll be leverage, there'll be funders, but it just might not totally be ESG.
And so maybe that is like, instead it'd be like a committee request. We ask that of our committee. Would that cover it?
Yeah, and I would definitely say they work with the ESG committee because that'll be a bulk of them, but we don't want to miss the others.
Okay.
And also there's all these non-congregate, like, we're all using hotel for non-congregate shelter now. And like my hotel has no ESG in it, but I would absolutely call it emergency shelter, right? So emergency shelter, bridge housing, let's just make sure we capture everything.
And I suppose, because like the programs that would be impacting that are the ones with the naming convention in HMIS that has ES at the end of it. That's who Solari is just running all their ES reports. So I guess
there you go.
And MAG is like, you have a lot of ability to say, hey, we want all that data, right? Isn't it your data? So we could potentially just have you guys find out who all the emergency shelter projects are first to investigate it further, or have our committee do that. I think this would be a good thing to try to ask the committee to do. Okay.
Yeah, the committee can absolutely pull this. We can pull it not broken down, but we can look at like average length of stay. We can pull off names even if we want to. Solari already has a dashboard for rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing and a bunch of data on all of those programs. And so we could create the same dashboard for these types of issues on the emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing side.
At some point, it would even be interesting to like say are the hotels looking different than, is congregate looking different than non-congregate?
And like, so right now on the rapid and PSH, it's broken down by program, like individually named programs. And so we can look at that to say, and then like group or poll based off of that. We don't have that on the emergency shelter side, but we can like pull reports on each of those. I will say transitional housing, only about 77% of our transitional housing is in HMIS. That is like our weakest point when it comes to it. And those are a lot of our like faith-based that we pull for the point in time count, but not for the rest of the year. Are there other things like, so we're about halfway through our time. So I really want to be mindful of time and say like, are there other things like, for example, on this reduced returns within 1 year, like the committee is currently like pulling together, like they're asking for a report out on rapid rehousing versus permanent supportive housing and how many people are returning to homelessness. So like there are other actions. Is it helpful for me to just like fill these in and send out to you? Do you all like want to direct more things? Like what action do you all want to take as a board versus letting the committee and other subcommittees like direct up to you what they are doing to address these?
It'd be good to know what they're already working on so we can not duplicate that effort.
Yeah, that's a really good idea to have them also just what you're working on, but also what your ideas are. For reduced homelessness for community bridges, it requires a data coordination specialist to go in there, because maybe you've exited somebody from your rapid rehousing program and they're going to be living in the apartment on their own. But on that returns to homelessness report, they maybe then go to St. Vincent de Paul and like access their shower. They're showing up now as a return since you re-entered into a homeless type service. So we've got to know they're still housed, XYZ. So, and then go and try to clean it up. So there's some of that stuff that takes place, but that's obviously very in the weeds. But it required a data specialist for us to try to clean up.
Just out of curiosity, Liz, have you talked to HMIS about like, can we differentiate between a shelter service and other ancillary services to stop that kind of, because when system performance measures, it would mess that up for sure, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
That happens in HMIS when somebody like has a support service outreach. So like a St. Vincent de Paul shower, for example, if they're still marked as a permanent housing and have that move-in date, it will not check them back in. So as long as they still have that permanent housing location and that like are enrolled in that program, then it does not kick them back into the system. But that requires that person still filled out that secondary piece of the outreach, right? So you have to do that sub-assessment in HMIS to not have them kick back into our by name list. And the data subcommittee is working on that. They just went through an entire thing of like what pulls you into our by name list versus keeping you off, and made a whole list of programs that should not be pulling you in versus pulling you into by name list.
Awesome.
We communicate it up and it helps to inform a lot of that he's talking about. But when you hear that the sub-assessment and the housing move-in date and all of those things, those are frontline staff that are putting that in. And we know with like what's going on with staffing right now, the level of training that goes into that. So that's why it's vital we have that data position as an organization who has a little bit more longevity, can receive those reports, communicate that, train the staff kind of over and over again. And that's just for one organization. So I just, thinking about it as
it just makes me wonder on just my outreach team, like they continue to serve people even once they're in housing or shelter or whatever. And so I wonder what's happening there and if we have figured that out,
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes.
I'm going to ask though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, so for me on that note, like I do recommend that the ESG subcommittee look, because they're very flexible with their funding. I understand the city of Chandler doesn't have it though. So maybe like Maricopa County would need to come in, but they fund a data specialist for maybe we think as a system, right? If you've got a provider with X amount of projects feeding into system performance measures, then ESG can come in and help fund a data specialist.
Yeah. So ESG, just for your knowledge, is a formula-based grant, just like CDBG and home. And it's a complicated formula. So if a jurisdiction doesn't meet the criteria to pull down ESG, they don't get it. Like, so Tempe only just got it like 2 years ago. Gilbert doesn't have it. We don't have it because the formula is about poverty, population, there's a bunch of things in there.
There's only 6 entities in the state of Arizona that get it. So it's Department of Economic Security, Maricopa County, Glendale, Phoenix, Mesa, and Tempe.
Yeah. So it's really hard for those of us who don't to fund emergency shelter.
Yeah,
CDBG has a 25% cap, 20% cap on public services. So
15%. Cap.
Sorry. Yeah, on public services. So, we hardly have any out of my 1.4 million I get annually for CDBG. It's like, barely anything.
That's really.
And then there's competition for those dollars for other services as well. So it's rough.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
really interesting. Thank you.
Yeah. And that ESG does outreach, emergency shelter, prevention. I'm not even sure, does it do transitional? I can't remember. I don't think so. So it's all of those services that the rest of the cities don't get funded for.
Homeless prevention, shelter outreach, and HMIS. As part of emergency shelter, there are like you can do some transitional, but it's not like your and it can also do rapid rehousing.
Yeah. So that's been part of like the regional discussion when those bigger cities are saying, why aren't you littler cities doing this? Well, we don't have any source of funding for it. So then we're trying to educate those that do that, like, we don't have the fund source.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, for me, I could go down a rabbit hole. It's like, well, what is that formula, right?
It's a federal formula. Yeah.
Why, you know, and then if it is around poverty in the community, then is it more like private funding that should go into those types of things?
Well, I think like our wealth, well, it's also population, but like Chandler, Scottsdale, Gilbert's wealth gets figured in there, and it's part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to get too distracted down this kind of like rabbit hole of ESG that I think could spend the rest of our time and then another probably 5 hours just talking about that. But definitely, are there other things that you all feel need to be incorporated into this as like, for example, with employment, do you want to do trainings? Do you want to do like, what are things, if you're like dreaming big, saying there's anything available to us that we want to do to improve this, like we want to be able to like capture that and also say like, can we make this happen, right? So I know like, and I want to try to like do a both and of, like we said, we want to do top down and also bottom up. What do other folks have ideas of? And so I'm wondering if maybe like this visual is going to become like pretty overwhelming with the amount of things that you are doing. And it is better to like have this all be done in like an Excel of like, here's your goal. And then here's the team that's doing it. And there will be like, there are things coming from bottom up that you all like aren't aware of that we can help fill in the gaps too.
I think a good next step is getting it out to them to hear their ideas or what they're doing. Otherwise, I'm going to take you down 1,000 rabbit holes. Just kidding.
Well, I think I really think they would have a good idea of what do we need the leaders to know in order to make things better, right? So I think hearing from them is excellent. Also, can we have some kind of trigger that triggers the board to relook at data, whatever, in whatever frequency, what data needs in whatever frequency, so that this isn't set in stone, it's relooked at every now and again. When you
say data needs, like, are you saying review our strategic planning on like a quarterly basis or whatever it is, or are you specifically talking about a certain data point?
I'm saying, I don't want to go back to the whole drawing board, but as we move along and things change and grow and whatever, maybe the board's like, you know what, I need to know this data point on a regular basis, and we haven't thought of it today, right? So in what frequency do we just look at what we're receiving and what we feel like we should be receiving, and also ask the question to the committees and stuff too? Is there something else that should be added? Or is there a data point that is actually not of benefit, or just whatever, and I don't know if it's annual or just a mechanism where you're not having to relook at the whole strategic plan, but you're just going, okay, are we getting the data we need?
I would also support the individual who mentioned the quarterly review, the 3 to 4 months as a point.
Katie, do you know if all the subcommittees, as a part of their roles and responsibilities, have like data points that they should be collecting?
Yes and no. I will say, like, Some data points are more like tangible. So like, for example, every single, I shouldn't say every single, the committee and the data subcommittee review like the system flow dashboard on a monthly basis. So like there are certain data things versus ESG is not like reviewing that on a regular basis. They have other things. And I would say like, I will say data in a loose form of like actual numbers versus like content that they're reviewing on a regular basis. So like there are things like the ESG and COC written standards that the ESG committee has to review on a regular, like on a yearly basis. So that is like things that they are reviewing. So all of them have a list of things that they are reviewing. I wouldn't necessarily say like solid data and numbers in the way that you would traditionally think about data. Did that answer your question, Liz?
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, because okay.
I will add, like, you all have a calendar that we've developed out for like things that you all need to review. So like, for example, this month you will see the NOFO scorecard coming to you. Like you have to review your charter on an annual basis. So the same way, we're working on developing that out for every single committee to having like a calendar that you all on an annual basis, so you don't have all of your policies being reviewed at the same time.
So maybe this is one of those, like review data coming in. Are we missing anything? Do we not need something?
Yeah, and I think like, so this I would love quarterly with the actual system performance measures on there, right? And then like for the subcommittees that do have specific data points that they're tracking and reviewing, if we added that to our agenda when they come to give us updates, the first thing they're going to go over is their dashboard. It sounds like that would help resolve the issue of not knowing the active number on the by name list, because the coordinator subcommittee would go over that first every time they came to present.
So I want to be mindful of time. We have about 15 minutes left. I know you all are extremely busy. Are there anything that you all like see on, I'm still sharing my screen. So is there anything that you all are seeing on this that is like critical of this is something the board is doing that is not included on here? We'll take this to each of the different subcommittees, asking if they have any feedback to give into this as far as this 6 system performance measures. The communications group is meeting next week, so we will take this to them also, and then data overall. But are there any things that you all are like, we know the board is doing this and this is really important that we keep on our radar, or the board should be doing this and we're not currently doing it?
Is the review of the NOFO scorecard on here?
No. So there are things that are requirements of you that aren't necessarily related to any of these 6 things. Does that?
You want to just like have another little box that lists out requirements?
Like roles and responsibilities, I think. And that's why I say like this visual is getting like bigger and bigger, and I'm running out of space in Publisher without it straining your eyes too much. So that's why I'm thinking maybe we switch to like a small visual and then with like a roundabout, and then we do all of the like line item tasks in Excel.
Yeah, I like that. Sorry, Katie. And I think that's the last thing that would be important to have on here, potentially. Plus we'll see all their ideas. I think even with new ideas that come in, though, we should be able to consolidate to, okay, yes, everyone has 1,000 ideas. Liz, you're gonna take us down a million rabbit holes, but these are the 2 we're going to work on.
Well, and I will say like one of the things that we've started to do is have like a parking lot, right? Like you have 1 million ideas, and maybe that is something we accomplish in 6 months from now. Like it's not a fire that we need to put out immediately, but it's also not something that in 5 years from now, if we haven't made this change, we're going to be moving forward in our system.
I think that was the first thing that came to mind for me too, Katie, was parking lot, because I I know I get this faulty assumption sometimes when I don't see something somewhere. I'm like, how is this not thought of, right? Well, it was thought of. It just wasn't prioritized. It's just it wasn't the first thing right now. So I think it's good to have some kind of parking lot. And then it's good to review that parking lot every now and then and go, okay, is it time to pull this forward?
Yeah, I would agree, because if it keeps coming up from the parking lot, then it probably needs to move forward as opposed to keeping it there. So the reference and follow-up with that would be good.
I just have a question. I'm looking at the enhancing HMIS. Do we have the capability to speak to the balance estate system when we're considering, returns to homelessness, to really look at retention rates? Is that our future, or am I just fantasizing?
So this may be another rabbit hole, but I will try to make it brief. There is like two things that are happening specifically with that. Is one, the HMIS evaluation is not specifically that. The LAP project is that. So learning and action and policy and partnership, which is essentially creating a data warehouse with all 3 HMISs from the state, as well as access data and potentially DES data in the future. That is like in process and probably like at least a year out to actually like talk to each other. And that is really going to be more for care coordination rather than returns to homelessness. Our system performance measures really do only measure folks that are housed out of our system and then return back to our own system. It won't mark, like if somebody got housed in the balance estate or in Tucson and then returned to our system, but have never touched our system before, that is deemed a new client for us because our HMIS systems don't talk to each other. And even in the future, like HUD will not be measuring us on that data warehouse. That will be more for care coordination. Our system performance measures will still only be our closed loop HMIS system.
Thank you.
Yeah. I will say the evaluation of HMIS itself is how our vendor, and how this is a evaluation across all 3 COCs, but it's really like the work with our vendor and what can our HMIS vendor do for us. And we will definitely be pulling in some of you folks as that evaluation gets underway to really understand like what are your challenge points with HMIS right now as a user, and then as a system coordinator, is there data that you want to see that we're not able to pull out of HMIS right now?
And I do just want to add, I see discuss with CE the ability to connect referrals with LIHTC projects. I do know very loosely that we're doing that through coordinated entry for families, but it is certainly not formalized. So I'm glad that's there.
Right. Any other thoughts for today? For next steps for us, I see us redoing this visualization to be really centered around your system performance measures, taking all of these smaller data points, putting them into an Excel, and then we'll be running it by every single subcommittee and committee to say if they have other ideas and bring it back to you. Based off of that, I feel like we need to have another session to talk about what did they see and what all do you want added, prioritized, need to be parking lotted. I am really hoping that before that next session, which I anticipate being in May, like probably mid to late May, that you all also are brainstorming and thinking about other things that need to come to the table, not just our subcommittees and committees. And then lastly, and we'll get this back out to you kind of before that meeting.
Great job, Katie and team. This is really cool. I love the colors really help. The structure really helps.
Didn't we need to get something done this time to inform something? We're going to wait till our board strategic planning session.
The thing that you are waiting to get done is how it's direction to the rank and review subcommittee. So you all want to give direction to rank and review as to like, are you just prioritizing past projects? Are you prioritizing something new? what does that look like? I think these conversations are helping to inform that. We did say, we didn't say, but Robin, Ryan, and I talked about in our agenda setting that we would talk about this at our April board meeting and start to put a work group together. So I do think these conversations will help to like shape and mold that. And we'll start those meetings in May as well. So it'll be a May and June conversation point.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much, Katie.
The last thing I will say is we are having a hybrid meeting for your next board meeting. So you all can come in person if you would like to come in person. Our office will be open for that meeting. And then we will also always have that online option. So you're welcome to join by Zoom or come into the office. And that will be happening on April 25th. So celebrate, don't celebrate, do whatever you feel like is best for you. But that it will be open and it'll be open to audience as well. So that will be going out with your agenda on Monday to let folks know.
Wow, some people are going to be so happy.
Charles.
Yeah, so I was just thinking about the successful exits to permanent housing. I know that MAG has been or was doing some work around re-envisioning the move-on strategy, and I don't see that on here. So is that a place to add that and the work that's going on there? What we can do. And also with that, the one that you're moving right now about PHA's increasing project-based voucher allocations. I think we've tried in the past. I think there's some opportunity for grantees that have scattered site vouchers to work with LIHTC properties. It's harder to make a long-term commitment because we have to apply for these things on an annual basis, but there may be a way to partner in that way and try and add some subsidy to those LIHTC properties. I know we're doing that with access and the access funding for housing and trying to work with some of those developers and put state vouchers into those properties. I think that's going to be a really big strategy for us to access units while we're facing this terrible market. As many people as we can get to do that, the better.
I'm going to bring this up real quick. I don't know where it fits, but Charles, you just inspired me in terms of you're bringing up something that is super current, but we just haven't discussed in this forum. So we are in one of those stop everything and figure this out moments around seniors just at end of lease now because they're on fixed incomes, and seniors or anyone on a fixed income, frankly, and their rent, raised $1,000 and they just don't have the income. We've been just tracking for like the last 2 weeks and we have 64 people that showed up at our door. Or landlords have called and said, we have 14 people who can't re-sign their lease because their monthly check is less than what we're raising the rent to. So we're like at a, crisis moment on this. So there's both short-term solutions and long-term solutions that we're looking to, that we're trying to craft. And so I just bring that up. So there's going to have to be short-term emergency shelter / bridge options. We've got all kinds of things that we're about to try. And then obviously the long-term options that are more, built what Stephen's talking about. So, Charles is talking about. I don't know where I got Stephen today. So I don't know if that fits in here somewhere, but I think it's going to be ever present in the next however how long it's a big deal. So I don't know.
No, I think that's great. I think that's in that first time homeless. These are folks that have never touched our system before.
It's a totally different looking thing. System. Yeah.
So they're clients.
And we're gonna be shifting resource to it because, right? We are. And so how is that going to impact what we're already doing as well?
So this is the kind of like brainstorming that please keep those flow going. If you even between this meeting and next meeting come up with ideas, feel free to email me. My email is off the table. I 1 a.m. thought, write it down next to you and then send me an email in the morning or at 1 a.m. whatever works for you. But really, like, we want to make sure that we're capturing everything, and maybe it isn't, maybe there are things that are moving into our parking lot and aren't immediate, but we want to be thinking about all of those things, right? All right. Well, I will let you go with 3 minutes unless anybody else has like additional thoughts that they want to share now. But really want to ensure that you all are able to get on with your busy days, but know that we are here to support you through this and really want to make sure that all the ideas are captured.
Thank you so much, MAD team. You're awesome.
Thank you.
All right, talk to you all soon.
Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Katie.